So we hear the word innkeeper and we think of the kinds of places that we stay when we're traveling and need some place to be overnight or for overnights. And so I have to put the Hilton in. I'm not from that family, which means I don't get any benefits at a Hilton hotel for having my last name. On the other hand, we don't have to deal with Paris, so it's a kind of a wash. The Hilton is here. A roadside motel that's probably at the lower end of accommodations, Airbnbs, which have become much more common ways that we stay when we travel in our time. The text that brings us to this whole set of associations is from Luke 2:7, where, and she, Mary, brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. And here I have the Greek word kaluma that is translated in. This is the King James Version of the Bible, right? And it's the translation here and has been in many editions over many translations over the course of the era since the King James, since the early translations of the Bible into English. And there's a reason for that. But some recent translations have it different, because later in Luke's gospel, that same word kaluma, look at it in the middle of this passage, that same word kaluma is used to translate, or it is translated guest room. Listen to the passage. This is also a familiar scene. Listen, Jesus said to Peter and John, when you've entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters and say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks you, where is the guest room, kaluma, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs already furnished. Make preparations for us there. So they went and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. So here, it's very, very clear that Jesus isn't saying, go to the Ramada Inn or go to the ancient version of that roadside hotel and tell them I need my room for us all to stay in. It's very clear that they're just going to have a meal and they want a guest room or a room in a house that's going to make space for that. And indeed, the word kaluma can be translated as guest room, can be translated as an outbuilding in a house that people have for their guests, or a room within. And all these are in larger houses. Most ancient houses were not large in this period, either in Palestine or in the rest of the Greco-Roman world. But people who had that space, sometimes this word kaluma was used to delineate that kind of space. And so you get, in some of the contemporary versions like this, which is New International Version, so we get from some of these, she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Now, we've thought about innkeepers for all of our lives and had this sort of grumpy look. Some of you, though, have read translations like this, and even a couple of you asked this question in your emails to me, and you've run across the fact that maybe this means guest room. Maybe it's not the proverbial innkeeper's sour face that we should picture, but a family that is already overrun with guests. It says, Joseph and Mary, I wish you'd have gotten here earlier, but you'll be out with the cattle, or you'll be out elsewhere. And the word manger that appears later tells us maybe where they end up, right? And so this is a possibility. And if it is, what Luke means here is that there weren't enough guest rooms in the house, so they had to stay outside. Then our innkeeper disappears from the pageant, and we have one less line to credit when the credits roll, right? But I want to hang with the old translation for a bit, because kaluma can also mean an inn along the way, a place you stay as you're traveling. And I want to read a passage from Leviticus first that talks about people whom the priests can't marry. Now, many of you know that if you've undertaken to read the whole Bible as a New Year's resolution or as something like that, many of you have run into the wall of Leviticus. You get through Genesis and Exodus, and you're hearing the stories of Abraham and his family, and then Moses and the escape from Egypt. But then a lot of laws start to come. You get the Ten Commandments, which are kind of exciting because you recognize them. But then all these ordinances, and by Leviticus 21, after you get through Genesis and Exodus, you get into Leviticus 21, and the purity laws are being laid out that keep a priest pure, because the priests operate in the realm of holiness and purity. And so in Leviticus 21, it says priests must not marry women defiled by prostitution or divorced from their husbands, because priests are holy to their God. Regard them as holy, because they offer up the food of your God. Consider them holy, because I, the Lord, am holy, I who make you holy. That's the laws that appears in Leviticus. You can't marry certain people, and those people are prostitutes, divorcees, and that's a pretty small list. But I want you to see what Josephus, writing in the 1st century, a little after Jesus's ministry on earth. Josephus is a Roman historian who is Jewish, and he often writes, some of you know him well, others of you have never heard of him. He often writes the history of the Jews as a sort of updated version. He has one long set of books called the Jewish Antiquities, and another called the Jewish Wars, in which he kind of chronicles the history of Judaism. This passage from Antiquities 4 is his version of the very passage I just read from Leviticus. In other words, Josephus is paraphrasing in Greek Leviticus for anybody who's ready to read this. And I want you to notice that there have been some additions to the list of people you can't marry. From the priests, he exacted a double degree of purity, for not only did he debar them in common with all the others from the aforementioned practices, but he further forbade them to marry a harlot. He forbids them to marry a slave or a prisoner of war, yes, or such women as gain their livelihood by hawking or by innkeeping. Now, this Greek word is a parallel to kaluma. It's pandakuane. So Josephus has added other developments in what a priest needs to avoid, including women who keep an inn or who help keep an inn, or who have, for whatever reason, been separated from their former husbands. I want to talk about that for a second, because the question arises, why does Josephus think that innkeeping isn't going to work for a priestly marriage? And it turns out, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And it turns out that these were very seedy places. From way, way back in Mesopotamian history and in Near Eastern history of different kinds, way, way back, from time immemorial, prostitution and other forms of sexual extremes from a Jewish point of view have been associated with places you stop to stay overnight along the road. It was true when it was only government workers traveling and the roads were just makeshift to get government workers around. And it became even more true as there were more roads made under the Roman Empire, and you had stops. And most of the time, if you stopped at an inn, you had to watch out. And Jews largely didn't stop there because of the prevalence of prostitution and of sort of loose sexual ethics, right? So now I want to, if we try that on, as an association with the inn, it's probably a new one for you. If you've watched the pageant all these years and seen the innkeeper and seen him give his no, or some of them have women doing it, give their no, you probably didn't associate them with loose living. You probably didn't think there's a brothel behind this guy or behind this woman. But in the ancient world, that's what they would have thought. And I want now, therefore, to follow Joseph and Mary's path and realize that as they're traveling, their option is a Greco-Roman inn, which would have all these associations and that they would have learned long ago is not a proper place for a Jewish family to stay, but they check in anyway because they're at extremis. They are, later we're going to get in our study of Joseph in 2 weeks, we're going to find out that he was a righteous man according to the law. But as they kind of battled the elements, having been forced away to go to his ancestral home, they may have even stopped by an inn and said, "Do you have any space for us?" That colors, in a way, the urgency of the need, right? Doesn't mean that kaluma must mean inn, but if it does mean inn, it adds a little color to the story for us because it makes us aware of how much Joseph and Mary had to fend against in their travel. Travel was hard enough, but everybody was traveling, and the inns were full, and the guest house was full, and all the options had been shut to them. I'm not going to tell you that it's either inn or guest house. Good scholars think both things. I do want you to have bigger thought bubbles when you come away from that part of the story this year. It's either brothel-like or the family didn't have quite have space for them. Neither one looks very pleasant.